election, with some thoughts also about 2020. The Russians conducted a coordinated cyber operation and disinformation campaign in 2020, and this consisted of two covert elements. The first element involved hacking computers serving the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee to steal sensitive information and then releasing that information through cutouts, non-attributable sources such as dcleaks.com, Guccifer 2.0, and WikiLeaks. The second element of the operation involved placing disinformation on social media platforms, especially Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And that is the focus of the presentation today. The purpose of all this Russian activity was to distract and confuse potential voters and influence the outcome of the election. In the words of the US intelligence community in an unclassified report released in January 2017, quote, "We assess with high confidence that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the US presidential election, the consistent goals of which were to undermine faith in the US democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. We further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump," end quote. But despite that early 2017 well-documented report, a survey as recently as last July, when 1,500 Americans were asked to answer this question, whether Russia interfered with the 2016 election, the possible responses were definitely true, probably not true, and definitely not true. Almost a third said probably not true or definitely not true. Didn't matter age for the most part, didn't matter gender, didn't matter, and it really didn't matter about ethnicity for the most part. And as you might expect, more because of the polarization in our political system, more Republicans thought the statement was probably not true or definitely not true, whereas almost 90% of Democrats believe the statement is definitely true or probably true. Just some key terms here before we get started. Disinformation, as opposed to misinformation, is intentionally using false or misleading information to deceive or manipulate, as opposed to misinformation, which is spreading false information without the intention to deceive. We'll talk about trolls, and a troll is shorthand in cyber lingo for a real human user that posts inflammatory, abusive, or divisive content meant to trigger an emotional response. And a group of trolls can be sometimes called a troll farm. You'll also hear about sock puppets. This is another term in the industry used for fake identities that are taken by operatives in social media by the Internet Research Agency. And then bots. Probably most of you know what a bot is. It's basically automated software that performs a specific function, such as posting certain content or liking posts. If you've ever dealt with your bank or called in customer service on just about any service available, you may have already spoken with a chatbot. So bots are important as we get into the presentation. Here's a very good Russian style definition of disinformation, which says a non-attributed or falsely attributed communication, written or oral, containing intentionally false, incomplete, or misleading information, frequently combined with true information, which seeks to deceive, misinform, and or mislead the target. And either foreign governmental and non-governmental elites or a foreign mass audience may comprise a target. This sounds like a very contemporary definition, but if you notice the source on this, it was taken out of a 1984 study on Russian disinformation. So disinformation on the part of the Russians is not new. The use of social media and other cyber means to distribute that disinformation is what's new here and what we're talking about in the 2016 election. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Facebook and the key things that they use here. These are emojis. and they're meant to generate emotions. Notice that of the 5 emojis you have here, there's nothing that says, let me think about that. It's all meant to generate either a positive response, a surprise response, a negative, or a sad response. Most social media platforms, as I'm sure you're aware, are like this, and we'll see some data later on where these come into play. Some other things you need to know before we start: this briefing is well documented, well sourced with multiple reliable and credible sources. It is, to make it a little more interesting, I hope, told from a Russian point of view. And so while the information on the slides that you're going to see is well sourced, and the sources for information on most of the slides is printed right on the slides, what you'll hear in the voice track is of necessity a little bit of creativity and guesswork. One other thing, you have a role to play too. Because we're telling this from a Russian point of view, your role is to pretend that you are Russian specialists in American politics. Many of you have lived in the United States and you know English very well. You also have very much a high interest in American politics, including the 2016 presidential election. You're being called back to the Kremlin 3 different times. Well, once about 6 or 7 months before the election in 2016, once a second time 5 or 6 months after the election, and a third time, which basically is today. So with that background, let me go ahead and start our presentation. Добрый день. Good afternoon. I am Sergei Ivanov, Chief of Staff to President Putin. This is Tom. Hello. We invite you here today to hear about plans for US election later this year. Because you are our American specialists, we call you Amerikanцы. That's a small joke. We want you to be aware of what we're planning to do. You are being granted access to Operation Lakhta. This is major active measures campaign, only part of which is US election. As you see, this is совершенно секретно, top secret. As our Amerikanцы, we think it's important for you to know about it. We come back to Lakhta in a few minutes. First, I need to tell you about important meeting we had with President Putin just a few days ago. This is when he approved our plan, and this is the reason for our meeting here today. Наш президент is very upset about Panama Papers. This is project by investigative journalists, including some Russians, сволочи, who think they identified President Putin's personal funds in accounts belonging to his friend, Sergei Raldugin. Imagine, they think Putin would be so stupid, hiding millions of dollars in account held by his friend. So what that Raldugin is musician with modest salary? Maybe he gets that money from inheritance, who knows? Anyway, Putin very upset. He don't like Hillary in first place, so now he wants to make sure she don't win election. You know, Russian active measures and disinformation were very effective during Cold War. Such example as Operation Infection, where we planted a story in a friendly newspaper in India that US military created AIDS virus in lab at Fort Detrick in Maryland. Story went viral in global media, even showed up on CBS Evening News. That was a good one. And you may remember Ivan Rybkin. This poor guy thinks he can beat Putin in 2004. Then he disappears for 4 days. When he reappears, there are pictures of him in intimate situation with woman, not his wife. That was good use of compromat. Ripken, he dropped out of campaign. These are only couple examples of our active measures. Who can forget poisonings of Alexander Litvinenko or Sergei Skripal in London, although last one didn't work out too well. Now, because many of you have spent so much time outside Russia and probably forgot your native language, I asked Tom to brief you on Operation Lakhta. He is also one of you Amerikansi. By the way, Tom is not his real name. It's another active measure. That was also a small joke. Over to you, Tom. Thank you, Sergey. Before we get into the details of Lakhta, I thought a little more background might be helpful. You may remember when President Medvedev started a Twitter account on a visit to Silicon Valley in 2010. Only about 2 million Russian adults were online, and online information was much freer then, in contrast to television, which Putin brought under government control in the early 2000s. Medvedev became the blogger-in-chief and was a frequent contributor to online discussions. Russian social media was very active and open in those days. Things changed when Medvedev announced near the end of his term that he would defer to Putin to run for president in the 2012 election. Putin, of course, had already served 8 years as president. People became very upset about this manipulation of their young democracy. And I'll come out of character here just for a moment to say that anyone who plays chess understands that the only move in chess where two pieces move at once is when the king exchanges places with the rook, and that's called castling. Well, the Russians call this switching back and forth between Putin and Medvedev and back to Putin. They called it rakirovka, which is the Russian for castling in chess. You gotta hand it to the Russians for their sense of humor. Back to Tom. The trouble began after the parliamentary elections in 2011. Thousands of people went to the streets to protest after some smart person analyzed the results and figured out that over 140% of the eligible population had voted. And most of them voted for United Russia, the party of Putin. Protests were organized by people using social media. Putin and Medvedev took a strong message from this, especially coming so soon after the Arab Spring. They interpreted the demonstrations as a result of information spread on, quote, American technology. As a result, the use of social media in Russia was soon restricted, and the internet in Russia became a lot less free and open. We learned lessons from these protests about the usefulness of social media and applied them in our own disinformation efforts. In Ukraine, for example, we used a combination of social media disinformation and other active measures during the Maidan Square demonstrations in 2013 and 14. The Ukrainians were protesting the corruption of their president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was supported by the Russians. Yanukovych fled to Moscow to escape the rioting crowds. Trying to control the situation, we sent pro-government messages on Kontakte, VK, the Russian rival to Facebook that is also used in the Ukraine. Together with our SORM wiretapping technology, the use of disinformation on VK helped confuse the demonstrators and prevent bigger problems. The other thing that happened about the same time was Edward Snowden. His revelations that the US had penetrated the global internet for intelligence collection helped convince Putin that the internet was a CIA project, US active measures, if you will. This led to a further restriction in Russia's online environment. You probably are aware that our generals have been worried about military uses of the internet for a long time. They consider it the main battlefield for information warfare. This led our military leaders, like General Gerasimov, to think differently about warfare. Gerasimov said, no matter what forces the enemy has, no matter how well developed his forces and means of armed conflict may be, forms and methods for overcoming them can be found. He will always have vulnerabilities, and that means that adequate means of opposing him exist. Oh, that Gerasimov is a great general. I love this man. Right, Sergei. Well, his great ideas were included in our military strategy. As you see on this slide, our thinking about modern military conflicts has expanded to include information and using popular opposition as important attributes of modern warfare. We use disinformation effectively combined with other active measures in Crimea and the Donbas conflict in eastern Ukraine. We did have a small problem in Donbas when some of our soldiers, who were supposed to be undercover, posted pictures and location of themselves on VK, revealing what they were up to. This information spread around the world and compromised our activities. Duraki. Yes, Sergei, they were foolish, but in the end, our disinformation campaigns were successful. Da, especially with shootdown of Malaysian airliner in 2014. Most people still believe Ukrainians did this. We also use disinformation tactics against Russian dissidents like Alexei Navalny, a continuing thorn in Putin's side. Our information operations were also successful on French TV, where our guys pretended to be ISIS representatives, and also in fake news about a chemical plant explosion in Louisiana in 2015. This one made US national news. So with that additional background, let's take a look at Operation Lakhta. Sergei? Tom, I just want to point out obvious fact that all this background information you provided shows we have lots of practice and experience in disinformation to prepare us for Lakhta and US elections. Right, Sergei. Let's get back to Operation Lakhta. As Sergei mentioned, Lakhta is a large operation involving our Foreign Intelligence Service and our military. It also includes a relatively new organization called the Internet Research Agency, or IRA. The overall purpose of Lakhta is to discredit Western politicians, governments, and societies. What we are telling you about today is just that part of it directed against the US election. On the left-hand side of this chart, you can see that our military units will conduct hacking operations against the Democratic National Committee, DNC, and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC. They will gain access to sensitive information that is harmful to Hillary and other Democrats. These units will also develop distribution channels, DC Leaks and Guccifer 2.0, for publishing information to a broad audience, including especially the US news media. On the right side of the slide, this part of Lakhta is a social media disinformation campaign that will take advantage of the American love of Facebook and other social media platforms. We will also use TV and other media through our friends at RT and Sputnik to help spread our messages. Here are the military units that have been tasked with this part of Operation Lakhta. In the West, they are known as APT-28, or Fancy Bear, and APT-29, or Cozy Bear. Other names are also used. By the way, APT stands for Advanced Persistent Threat. You'll be happy to learn that one of our units, APT-29, or Cozy Bear, has already penetrated the Democratic organizations. They have been in the DNC and the DCCC systems for over a year. Now here we are in April of 2016. They were very clever in doing this, establishing a covert infrastructure in the United States to exfiltrate and hide the stolen data. And APT-28 will soon begin operations using this same infrastructure. For the other part of our project, we will penetrate all major social media platforms using false or stolen American identities. We will also purchase ads on Facebook and Twitter to promote phony events, and we will create Facebook groups that favor the Trump campaign. We will take advantage of American naivete about our activities and their love of Facebook. We will target people we know are favorable to Trump with pro-Trump ads, and people that we know support Hillary will get negative ads about her campaign. And who knows, the Americans are so gullible, they may even share our posts with others who can become convinced to support Trump. To make sure our message gets out, we will use bots or automated software to generate a large number of followers for all our information. The IRA will be the main engine for our social media disinformation campaign. The IRA was organized only a few years ago to focus on internal Russian politics, but it has grown dramatically and not too long ago moved into a new building near St. Petersburg. By the way, some people call this a troll farm. The IRA is owned by a close friend of President Putin, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Oh, look at him, he is bad dude. Yes, Sergey, very bad, but good for us. By the way, as an example, we will use one of our unwitting American resources to hold a sign in front of the White House next month, wishing a happy 55th birthday, dear boss. We will publicize pictures of this and show them to Prigozhin, who will be 55 in June. And this will show him how successful our disinformation operations have been. The IRA is well staffed. They have junior people like Sasha here. These folks have limited education and work as commenters. They focus on internal Russian politics. These people have to submit at least 50 posts in every 12-hour workday. They focus on identifying and discrediting potential opponents to President Putin and other United Russia politicians. And they have a lot of college-educated people like Yena, who handle American social media. Their English is excellent, and they make many friends in Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. After 1 month on the job, they're expected to have at least 500 subscribers. Friends who read their posts regularly and get at least 5 comments on their posts every day. Of course, these people get paid more, as much as $1,500 a month. Not really a problem for the IRA because it's very well funded. It has a monthly budget of over $1.25 million US, so it can do a lot to support Lakhta. We did have one security problem. This woman was a whistleblower. She was a regional TV news reporter from Central Russia. She infiltrated the IRA and revealed some of its operations as a troll farm. Sukha. Yes, Sergey, she is not nice. But the good news for us is that no one paid much attention to her, especially in the US. Also, there are many young people being trained in social media operations, so we don't have to worry too much. We have endless supply. One more thing. We tried out our social media operations in Europe over the past 2 years for many other purposes, especially in the elections of Macron and Merkel. We have plans for the EU parliamentary elections in 2019. And our sock puppets have been very successful in terms of the overall goals of Operation Lakhta. Oh, I love these sock puppets. I have one myself. I got in Budapest last summer. That Viktor Orban in Hungary, he knows a thing or two about active measures. Well, Amerikanci, that's our plan for 2016 elections. Come back next year and talk about results. Welcome back, Amerikanci. We're glad to tell you about success of Operation Lakhta in last year's US elections. It was huge success. Our boy Donald got elected. We were all surprised and had a big celebration. So much vodka and champagne. I got a big headache. Had to, Tom, how you say apokmelitsa in English? Take a hair of the dog that bit you? Ha, well, I took care of many dogs, still had a big headache, but was great celebration. Tom, you talk about the results now. Okay, Sergey. We know from American reporting how successful our efforts were. The combination of hacking and social media disinformation combined with other active measures achieved the results President Putin wanted. And we know from our sources that the Mueller investigation is gathering data on our social media campaign. Even though this report isn't due out for a while, we can already see some of its statistics and main conclusions. You can see the numbers here. 80,000 Facebook posts seen by 125,000 Americans, and 1.4 million Americans may have seen our tweets. Excellent work. Yes, Sergey, it was. And our broader disinformation campaign was and continues to be very successful, as you can see here. As you can see from these the points on this slide, the IRA is targeting all parts of the US political spectrum on many topics not just posts about the election. Posts about somebody's favorite recipe, for example, helps to attract people and build trust with IRA operatives. This is useful later when those same trusting people like and share our political posts. It is a comprehensive and effective operation. So how do we do this? We use the 4D approach. Dismiss the critic, distort the facts, distract from the main issue, and dismay the audience. And we tell stories, narratives that get people's attention. Some people call these stories conspiracy theories. We don't care, just as long as they work. And our sock puppets were very effective. They pretended to be, well, everybody, from rednecks to unemployed white guys to African Americans. Sometimes one person would pretend to be all these people. They tell me it was exhausting. Let me show you some of my favorite posts. Political themes against Hillary in favor of Donald. Patriotic themes playing on love of veterans and themes about white supremacy. Racial themes. Religious themes. Immigration themes. And here are advertisements that showed up on Facebook. Sometimes these ads attracted Americans to organize rallies and get out crowds in support of Trump or against Hillary. Here is tweet from IRA looking at splitting North from South. Here is Black Lives Matter and police, law enforcement, fake information. And here is Second Amendment tweets in favor of gun advocacy. And here is a partial list of IRA ads posted in Facebook and Twitter. I turn back to Tom. Right, Sergey, so you can see some of these now, some of these themes in IRA advertisement. I say no to Hillary, I say no to manipulation. Donald wants to defeat terrorism, Hillary wants to sponsor it. Hillary Clinton doesn't deserve the black vote. Ohio wants Hillary for prison. And among all the candidates, Donald Trump is the one and only who can defend the police from terrorists. Many similar themes in the ads that they used. We have access to actual data if you're interested in details. You can see the volume is quite large. This is the monthly average of posts and ads on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. There is a lot of information. For example, the IRA used Facebook's Ad Manager API to create over 70 different ad accounts. Many of these ads encourage readers to look at other IRA posts and interact with IRA postings as well. That's in addition to the thousands of posts and tweets. Also, Google data shows that at least 225 YouTube videos may have been used as part of our overall disinformation effort. And those are just the ones they know about. Here are some of the Facebook pages used by the IRA. You can see Heart of Texas, Blacktivist, Army of Jesus, Brown Power, LGBT United, many others, Veterans Come First, Woke Blacks, etc. The themes of these pages changed over time. Posts right before the election were more focused on political themes, taking advantage of the trust IRA operators had built with earlier posts aimed at specific groups like gun owners, minorities, and the LGBTQ community. In February 2016, for instance, IRA operatives were instructed to use any opportunity to criticize Hillary and the rest, except Sanders and Trump. We support them. Another post in the Woke Blacks Instagram account stated, quote, particular hype and hatred for Trump is forcing blacks to vote Hillary. We cannot resort to the lesser of the two devils. We'd surely be better off without voting at all, end quote. Here's a summary view. Now, some people point out that as much as 2/3 of this activity occurred in 2017 and so couldn't have affected the election outcome. Two comments about that. Number one, Operation Lakhta, as we mentioned, is bigger than the election and continues even today. We have some information to suggest that pre-election posts made a difference, especially in the final days of October and first days of November. Tom, speed it up. We don't have all day. Right, Sergey. Here you can see the weekly post volume that increased on Facebook and Instagram in the 2 months prior to the election. For some reason we don't fully understand, it went down a little bit on Twitter in that same time period. Our research shows that Russian disinformation had a significant impact on late deciders, those voters who waited till the last minute to decide who to vote for. You can see here key states that swung the election in favor of Donald Trump had a significant difference in people voting for Trump who were late deciders. Nationally, late deciders favored Trump 47 to 42%, and 22% of the electorate with unfavorable views of both candidates went more for Trump than for Clinton. And disinformation especially helped suppress minority participation. There's a lot of data about that. Also, pre-election disinformation, there's no question that Americans assisted in our efforts by liking, sharing, and commenting on our disinformation in social media, even though they didn't realize what they were doing. That's something we weren't counting on, but we are glad it happened, and it worked in our favor. You might wonder why Lakhta was so successful. We have a few ideas, as you see here. Mirror imaging. Americans believe Russians wouldn't do anything to them because we wouldn't do anything like that to the Russians. There are these psychological aspects that people gravitate toward people that believe like they do, who have in the same groups, and confirmation bias, people believe what they want to believe and what they expect to be true. And then there's the intense human and computer-based effort, which the Oxford Internet Institute has called computational propaganda, algorithms to ensure that people and their friends see like-minded posts. Welcome back, Americans. Good to see you again. So why are we here today? I have received many emails from you asking whether we can do this again in 2020 election. That means use this information to make sure Donald is reelected. The answer is может быть, maybe. Tom, you tell them. Right, Sergey. Well, we have to think hard about this for several reasons. First of all, the Americans have analyzed what happened in 2016. They've conducted investigations, held congressional hearings, and published a lot of reports, as you can see on this slide. Look, they even indicted some of our guys. The Americans are sumасшедшие. They are crazy. And here is a story from a couple months ago. Facebook thinks they found more IRA posts. They never find all of them. The Americans also figured out that our hacking teams penetrated state and local election systems, and they are worried we may expand that effort next year. Also, the new CISA agency at DHS is working hard with state and local election authorities. They've established an election interference ISAC, an information sharing and analysis center to support state and local governments identify and share any indications of election interference. They're also installing Albert machines in the election infrastructures of many states. These are like advanced firewalls that can detect computer intrusions while they are happening. CISA is also conducting cybersecurity exercises with state and local election officials to help them identify and respond to any intrusion activity in next year's elections. And the 2020 Fiscal National Defense Authorization Act, recently approved by the US Congress and signed into law, the Director of National Intelligence has been tasked with upgrading security clearances for top state election officials from the secret level to top secret. And that should improve the sharing of election threat information. In addition, the Americans are reviewing what Europe has done in response to Russian gaslighting and other disinformation over many years. They've created organizations to look for and respond to disinformation. They've studied, analyzed, and communicated disinformation activities through various centers that have been stood up in NATO countries and elsewhere. They've increased the monitoring of social media platforms and working with social media companies to find them for disinformation if it violates European Union privacy regulations. And they've also, like the US CISA, used cybersecurity exercises to prepare for attacks. We're not too worried about the social media companies. They don't seem to be very interested in stopping our disinformation efforts. That's because they don't want to hurt their business model, which depends on revenue from ads. And you may have seen that just the other day, Facebook said it would not prevent politicians from lying in their posts. Astonishing. And not only that, the US government has given new authorities to Cyber Command to respond to any interference by hacking back, attacking anyone who uses cyberspace to interfere with the elections. We have to keep eye on that Nakasone. He doesn't mess around. He killed us in 2018 midterm elections. And just a few weeks ago, Cyber Command conducted training for National Guard troops so they can support state and local elections. So we have to be careful next year. On the other hand, and in our favor, there are now at least 70 countries that use disinformation in the form of computational propaganda for political purposes. This is basically disinformation directed against their own people. They use it to suppress dissent, discredit political opponents, or to build support for their government. But several countries besides Russia are now using computational propaganda to supplement more traditional forms of information related to their foreign policy. Also, there are new technologies that may help us. Artificial intelligence and predictive text can help generate automatic messages, so we don't have to rely only on those college students in the IRA. And the possibilities with deep fake videos are endless. So, Tom, this means we could use disinformation in next US election and people would not think it's only Russia doing this? Could be Iran, China, or Venezuela? Exactly, Sergey. It won't be easy, but it is possible. And this is in addition to using our hacking capabilities to disrupt the voting registration process for vote counting. Very interesting, Tom. Meantime, Amerikansi, we have things to worry about at home. Let me show you. This is short video from Canadian TV News.
Officials disqualified opposition candidates from the election. They failed to collect an genuine signature to rise. But what started as an attempt about a local election has since turned into something much bigger. Tens of thousands joined in. August saw the biggest political protest Russia has seen in close to a decade. The police crackdowns have escalated, growing more violent. Those who wanted to run as the opposition have been arrested. But the protests represent much more than ballot blocking. These speak to what's happening throughout the country, starting with its leader. His name and face pop up at many of the rallies in the nation's capital. But the man himself is anywhere but the protest. During one July event, Vladimir Putin wasn't even on land. He was up the water to see a
he could make them go back and making papers, and lo and behold, find that they're okay. That would defuse the whole thing. He hasn't done that. So clearly, he backs the rather draconian methods that Moscow is using.
Putin has been in powerful political positions since 1999, and his rating as a leader is still up there at well over 60%. more than what many other world leaders can brag about. But Russia's trust in Putin has been slipping, and this may be because a younger generation is looking for change.
They've only known Putin in power. So there's a great deal of Putin fatigue, and the 20 and early 30-year-olds see the possibility of Putin staying in power for at least another 5 years, according to his constitutional term. And they're seeing their most productive years of their life all taking place under one ruler, which they see as just something that shouldn't happen in a civilized country.
But some of the people out there pushing for change are getting pushed back. Police punched this 26-year-old woman in the stomach, an incident that had Russian celebrities take notice, including rapper Igor Creed, who posted about the arrest. And if history proves anything, the more authorities have tried to fight the people on the streets, the more angry they become. Protests like these are a pretty rare sight in Russia, but they look a lot like the protests that happened between 2011 and 2013, when police clashed with anti-Putin protesters who took to the streets alleging electoral fraud. Today, the people of Moscow are again on the streets for democracy.
A segment of the population got really angry about being treated, basically treated like garbage by the ruling bureaucracy in the city. Even the scraps of democracy that they enjoyed were kind of snatched away from them in a rude sort of a way. But it's extremely significant because it points to the Achilles heel of the Putin regime and the mini Putin regime in Moscow, which is that they don't have democratic legitimacy.
Putin has had a tight grip on Russia for 2 decades. But what's brewing in the nation's capital could pose a challenge that could sink the Russian leader.
So, to conclude, Americans, we don't know yet about election 2020. We still thinking about it. Maybe you come back next year and we tell you everything. Спасибо. Thank you for your attention and support of our many disinformation activities. That's the end of the presentation. Just looking in at the chat now. Okay, some people had poor quality audio. It was supposed to have audio. I'm sorry about that if you didn't hear that. Any other questions that anyone has? Edward asks thoughts about how we serve it in the other direction too. I'm assuming disinformation against Russia. I've read a few things in the open source press, but I really don't know any particular plans. The US has done that in the past during the Cold War and other times in its history. But for good reason, there's not a lot of details about what is being planned, if anything, today. Matt asks, do you have any scholarly sources or institutions for research on this? I have a reference list. If you want to email me, I'll be glad to send it to you. That email is tthomp83@jhu.edu. tthomp83@jhu. Renee asks, what new technologies besides blocking internet traffic from these countries can be leveraged to fight against those campaigns? They seem to lack security, which makes defending against them hard. Well, you're actually right, Renee. The real vulnerability here is the human beings who interact with social media and who are convinced by posts that may be not reliable information. Yeah, and here's a comment from Dr. DeBora at JHU. Thomas Reed at SAIS, Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, is a specialist in this area of disinformation. He has a book coming out in the near future on Russian active measures. There are also many firms and new activities that are being spawned as a result of all the disinformation in social media. You saw a reference to the German Marshall Fund. They have something called the Hamilton 2.0 dashboard that tracks on a real-time basis disinformation in Twitter. There's a firm called Graphica. You saw one of the slides in there reference Ben Nemo. He's now at Graphica. They do a lot of work on Russian disinformation. And the military forces, the Air Force, the Army, Marine Corps are all standing up disinformation organizations just in the last year because of the continuing threat of disinformation. Do I think social media companies are to blame? Twitter seems to be stepping up their game, but others seem to be lagging with outing these countries and their efforts. Yeah, I think my own personal view is the social media companies could be doing a lot more. They are saying the right things, but the disinformation is still being posted in their accounts. And so they don't seem to be taking it as seriously as they're talking about it. Whether that leads to government regulation, probably not in the US. And so it's just more a requirement for people to be more vigilant, more alert, and more sensitive, and more skeptical about whatever they see on social media or things from sources they haven't seen before or read about. Would I please write my email? Okay. I don't know if you're seeing this or not, but there you go. Do I think social media played a direct intentional role in this? No, I think they were a vehicle for a very clever and thorough Russian disinformation campaign. As I tried to point out, the Russians have been doing this for decades, and they have figured out how to manipulate social media to achieve their goals in disinformation campaigns like they did for the election. I don't see any more questions. Oh, here we go. Is the idea that there's undue restrictions on that military information, disinformation being stood up valid? Just hang on a second here. His understanding is that authorities are tied to outdated concepts regarding differences between cyber operations, information operations, and influence campaigns. I don't think I have a good answer for that. I will tell you that if you look back in the 1990s, Dorothy Denning, a Georgetown professor, wrote a very powerful book on disinformation. And so disinformation in the 1990s was a major activity and a major area for strategy for the United States and in the Defense Department in particular. This kind of got overwhelmed, in my view, by the move to cyber operations and cyber war in the early 2000s. And we sort of set it aside to deal with more technology-focused cyber operations. But if you go back into the 1990s, the RAND Corporation also did a study on disinformation. There was a lot of publications then that understood what disinformation was and how it worked. Yes, Jeff is right. The social media companies are making money on information and ads every time you click. There was just information yesterday that Alphabet published its annual financial report for 2019. It made over $9 billion on YouTube ads alone. And that was an 85% increase since 2017, just in a couple of years. And even the enormous amount of $9 billion for YouTube was less than 10% of all the ad revenue that Alphabet took in last year. It's the first time they've published numbers like that. It's pretty interesting. But you're right, that their business model is to make money. They'd like to say that, you know, truth is important, but probably not as important as the revenue. Okay. CA forum, I think I'm done unless you have anything else to add or any other questions.
Nope. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you. I just want to remind everybody that we will be posting this recording on the CAE community website within 48 to 72 hours. So have a good day, guys.
Thank you.